Ukrainians reportedly crossed Dnipro river, landed in Kinburn Spit and engaged Russians. And if they are successful, this will allow them to approach the remaining Russians in Kherson from behind for ultimate counteroffensive. At the same time, Russians are actively thinking whether they should surrender Zaporozhye Nuclear Power Plant, and earlier last week Putin received an offer he couldn't refuse. But more about all of this in just a couple of minutes. What's up, investors? It's the Russian dude. And let's go straight to the point and see some most recent footage. And our first picture comes to us from the capital of Ukraine, Kiev, where the security service of Ukraine was doing a search in Kiev-Pechorska Lavra. The people at the church were allegedly helping Russians, and during this search some pro-Russian materials were discovered. The response of Russia to this event is that Ukraine declared a war on Russian Orthodox Church. The next picture comes to us also from Kiev, where you can see the capital of Ukraine being without light. If you remember, as for now it is estimated that approximately 50% of Ukraine's energy infrastructure is destroyed. And this was due to massive attacks by Russians back in October and November, and at the same time this severely depleted the inventories of missiles for Russians. And then we have this picture presented to us by the Minister of Defense of Ukraine, Alexei Reznikov, which shows us that Russia is left with approximately 13% of its main missile Iskander. And yes, if you remember from my yesterday's episode, Iran and Russia came to an agreement to produce Iranian drones on the territory of Russia, which might help Russia with the problem of low supplies later, but not in the nearest future, because obviously it takes time to produce such drones. And because of this, as for now it is estimated that Russia only has supplies for 3 more massive attacks, which, to be honest, might not be as efficient as before, because as for now Ukraine is intercepting at least 70% of Russian missiles. And ultimately it might take Russia approximately 14 to 16 months to restock its arsenal, which basically means they might want to save their current missiles for whenever they decide it's absolutely necessary. But okay, and now let's get back to the footage. And our next picture comes to us from Belgrade, where you can see that Russians are constructing their own defense lines. What you see right now on your screen is somehow supposed to stop Ukrainians from advancing, even though they never technically crossed the border and they have no reasons to do so. At the same time, as you can see right here, Russians are installing these concrete pyramids called the Dragon Teeth. But if you remember one of my previous videos, it was shown that the effectiveness of these pyramids is quite low. To be honest, based on everything that is happening right now in Ukraine, especially in the south, I do have a feeling that something major can happen before the end of the week. And if you don't want to miss my future updates, please consider liking this video and subscribing to my channel. I will also have a charitable live stream this Saturday, November 26th at 6 PM Eastern Standard Time, and I have a very big surprise for you. So please make sure to mark your calendars. Alright, and before I give you an update from the east, let's just really quick talk about the potential invasion of Russians from Belarus. Because according to Alexei Arestovich, and I'm just quoting him on this one, Russians are seriously considering invading from Belarus through either Kiev or Volyn. And to be honest, I don't even know which one is worse. First of all, Kiev, being the capital of Ukraine, is obviously one of the most protected regions in Ukraine. That is why I seriously doubt that inexperienced recent recruits of Russia will be able to do anything in this region. And the second region is Volyn. And I mean, like, seriously? This region is located as far as possible from any of the front lines. That is why I see no reason why Russians would go there. They won't be able to receive any reinforcements except the ones which will be coming directly from Belarus, and in case they decide to do this venture, Ukrainians will immediately corner them. So in this case, I think that this direction is also doomed to fail, But what do I know about Russian military tactics? Alright, and now as promised, let's talk about the situation in the east. And first of all, according to the report by the Institute for the Study of War, the main direction of Ukrainian attacks is along Svatovo-Kreminna road, while Russians are concentrating their efforts next to Bakhmut and Avdiivka. But the combat activities are getting harder for both countries due to worsening weather conditions. On this map you can see the most significant fighting in the last 24 hours, and it pretty much confirms previously made statement. Some other reports claim that one of the biggest fighting right now is happening around Yakovlevka, which is located to the northeast of Bakhmut. But the good thing about this is that the landscape to the west of Yakovlevka is geographically higher than the one in the east, which pretty much gives it easier for Ukrainians to perform their counteroffensive. And then another major fighting scene in the east is happening around Pavlivka, and it has been reported that Russians are putting more and more soldiers into this settlement, including the ones relocated from Kherson region, because apparently, for some reason, this is a very significant location for them. And it seems that they pretty much do not care about the costs, because they just simply want to capture the entire city. Alright, and before we talk about Russians who are potentially thinking about surrendering Zaporozhye Nuclear Power Plant, allow me to give you a very quick update from the same region, which just came recently. And what happened is basically that Ukrainians were able to destroy a Russian military base in Tokmak. As you can see, it is located deep inside the occupied territory, and the alleged place where this attack came from was from the north of this region. At the same time, it has been reported even by Russians that Ukrainians started slowly advancing to the north of Tokmak. As for now, it is way too early to talk about the purpose of this attack, but they might try to approach Melitopol from the northeast. Because if you remember from my previous episodes, this is the next major city in the south for Russians, where they relocate from the places like Kherson. And maybe Ukrainians will try to intercept those retreating Russians, not to let them strengthen their positions in the east. Alright, back to Zaporozhye Nuclear Power Plant. If you remember, for the last several days, the territory of the plant has been under severe attacks. The Russian side claims that these were Ukrainians, for some reason, attacking their own territory. But most likely, the ones responsible for these attacks are Russians who are trying to inflict maximum damage to the station before they leave. And the reason for this is that in case they surrender the power plant to Ukrainians, they will not be able to use it. According to several Russian media sources, Russians are actively considering giving up the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant. And one of the potential reasons for this, it is because the International Atomic Energy Agency urged Russians to return the plant to Ukrainians. And pretty much no one else in the world acknowledges the control of Russia over this plant. That is why Russians might surrender this power plant and give the control first of all to the International Atomic Agency. And as soon as they give it back to Ukrainians, the Russian government will tell its people is that we did not surrender the plant to Ukrainians. We only gave it back to the International Atomic Energy Agency. But another potential reason for this surrender is that Putin might use this goodwill gesture to try and save Crimea. Because if you remember from my previous episodes, as soon as Ukraine was able to take Crimea under fire control, it becomes less and less safe every single day. And yeah, every single day I receive more and more footage which YouTube does not allow to use in my videos. Because of this, I uploaded some of it to my Discord, and the rest will be available on my Patreon. And if you want to see this prohibited footage, the links will be down below. Alright, and now let's talk about the crucial update from the south. First of all, according to several reports, both countries are actively shelling each other on both sides of Dnipro river. And the main concentration of Ukrainian Ukrainian attacks being in Kakhovka and Oleshki. This shelling, especially by Russians, intensified recently, which allows me to think that they are trying to cover their retreat. At the same time, a significant portion of Russian forces has been spotted going in and out of Skadovsk, and ultimately some of them continue their journey to the east, which supports the idea about the final retreat of Russians from Kherson region. And I mean, you probably already know that the next major city in the south where Russians migrate from Kherson is Melitopol. But today we also received several reports saying that Russians send their reinforcements to Melitopol from Mariupol. So at this very moment it is almost clear that Russians subconsciously gave up on Kherson region, and now they are building their next major defenses in Zaporozhye region. And to make things worse for them, today Ukrainians reportedly landed on Kinburn Spit, which can potentially mean the beginning of the ultimate counteroffensive against Kherson. And let's talk about this in more details right now. So, according to the report by the Institute for the Study of War, one Ukrainian official reported that Ukrainians are conducting military operations on Kinburn Spit. At this very moment, it is not exactly clear what is happening in this place or how successful Ukrainians are, because the Ukrainian authorities are asking for operational silence. But there is one thing which is pretty certain, is that Ukrainians were able to cross Dnipro river. As you can see, this Kinburn Spit is located only approximately 4 kilometers from Achakiv. And the importance of this place is that it provides one of the easiest access for Ukrainians to enter Kherson. And in addition to that, they will be able to approach some Russian positions from behind, such as for example in Hola Pristan and Oleshki. At the same time, the presence of Russian artillery systems and missile launchers on this Kinburn Spit was allowing Russians to target Ukrainian areas. So that is why the importance for Ukrainians to retake this territory is now even more significant. Because yes, if Ukrainians are able to enter Kherson from the west, those Russians still remaining next to Dnipro river will no longer be able to retreat to the south. And that is why pretty much the only option they will have left is to retreat to the east. And as soon as it happens, it will become even easier for the rest of Ukrainian forces to cross Dnipro river from places such as next to Kherson city and Kakhovka. So I would personally say that the success of Ukrainians at liberating the rest of Mykolaiv and Kherson region now lies in Kinburn Spit. And so yeah, once again, if you don't want to miss any updates on this rapidly developing situation, just please consider subscribing to my channel. It only takes one click. Alright, and now let's really quick talk about some unsettling events and no panic in Crimea. Because in this video, which came to us from Sevastopol, we can see the work of the Russian air defense system. And according to the local quote authorities, there were 2 Ukrainian drones launched against Yevpatoria and Sevastopol, and both of them were intercepted. And then we have the statement by the Russian infiltrator in Crimea, Sergei Aksyonov, who is saying that officially there is no evacuation in Armyansk. And to be honest, this is the very first time I personally hear about even the possibility of such evacuation. So it kind of feels like that these were Russians who created this news about evacuation from Armyansk, and then they said, no, these were Ukrainians, don't believe them, they're just trying to create instability in Crimea. But I mean, you know, in the past, such news were always the predecessors of Ukrainians liberating these settlements. So I mean, let's wait and see. But then Sergei Aksyonov continued his statement, and he basically said that officially there is no evacuation in Crimea, there is no panic in Crimea, there will be no mobilization in Crimea, and after every single sentence he was emphasizing that Crimea is a part of Russia. And I don't know about you, but it does feel like that he's trying to predict the future. Alright, and very briefly, the final news for today is that right before G20 summit, Putin was offered a deal he couldn't refuse. but he still refused. And long story short, a third country involved both with Russia and Ukraine offered Putin to return every single annexed territory, including Donbass region, and in return Putin will be able to keep Crimea. Because at this point everyone knows that this peninsula is pretty much the Putin's legacy to Russia, and he will do everything possible to keep it. But then Russia did a massive shelling against Ukraine exactly during the G20 summit. That is why reportedly this deal was off the table. And because of this, some people assume that Putin might actually start giving up territories, such as for example Zaporozhye Nuclear Power Plant, in order to have a last chance at trying to save Crimea. But as you already know, Ukraine is not ready to negotiate until every single territory, including Crimean Peninsula, is back. Zelensky also says that he does not believe the good intentions of Russians for these negotiations, because according to him, they will simply try to buy themselves a little bit more time. And while there will be this temporary ceasefire, Russia will just regain power and then attack Ukraine once again. And then overall, just the regular Russian citizens are getting just tired of this war. Because according to the alleged survey conducted by Kremlin itself, more and more Russians see absolutely no purpose in continuing this war. The sentiment of regular Russians is the following, is that their government is promising them that they are the ones doing the right thing and everything will be better in the future. But so far it is getting worse and worse every single day, and the ones directly affected by it are the regular people. In the beginning, Russians were thinking that this whole thing is just for a better cause for the nation in general. And right now, more and more of them are suffering the personal consequences. And no matter how much you love your government, at some point, family and friends become more important. If you want to support my work, please consider becoming my channel member, use a PayPal link, or become my Patreon, where you'll receive additional content. You can find all the useful links to the right and down below. Thank you so much for your attention, товарищи, and see you tomorrow.